Here's the question no one asks. If working in a lord's luxurious home offered security and shelter, why did so many servants envy life on the streets instead? From waking up on cold, damp floors to being fed scraps no higher-ranking servant wanted, every hour reminded you of your place. Rather than freedom, life inside these grand estates meant surviving humiliation, loneliness, and exhaustion. Tonight, you'll step into their shoes to understand how survival often came at the cost of dignity and hope. Your eyes open to darkness, the kind that presses against your face, heavy and indifferent, veiling any comfort that might distract you from the cold, hard surface beneath your body. The floor isn't just hard. It's a kind of chill that creeps into your bones, the damp sting of stone left untouched by warmth for centuries. Your body aches from the position you fell asleep in, or more accurately, the position you collapsed in hours ago. The thin mat beneath you, if you can call it that, feels more symbolic than practical, doing little to shield you from the unforgiving floor of the servants' quarters. The thin wool blanket wrapped around you is another example of practicality winning over comfort. Patchy, worn at the edges, and as rough against your skin as a scouring pad, it hovers uselessly somewhere between covering your shoulders and your legs, but never both at once. Nearby, in the dim blue-grey quiet, you hear the soft sighs and shuffles of other servants starting to stir. Some are awake, their breaths deliberate and resigned. Others cling to the last thread of sleep, faces barely visible in the faint moonlight slipping through a cracked window. That window is the only one in the quarters, jammed shut from years of swelling wood, though shut is an optimistic term since nothing can stop the draft that snakes through its rotting edges. When the wind blows, it whistles, a sharp, high-pitched note that seems to mock you when you lie awake at night. This morning it's still, but the air is thick and wet, the kind of cold that promises frost outside. A single lantern flickers low in the corner, its light casting long, scheming shadows across uneven walls. You're too familiar with this scene to find it eerie anymore. The worst monsters in this house aren't the kind that cling to shadows anyway. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the person sleeping closest to you. Space here isn't divided by personal belongings or furniture, just unspoken rules about where one pallet ends and another begins. Privacy is something you gave up the day you entered this house. No, perhaps privacy isn't the word. The idea of it doesn't exist for someone like you. Your body, your space, your time. It all belongs, explicitly or otherwise, to someone else. You rub your arms briskly, trying to chase the sting of cold away with movement. There's no roaring hearth in this part of the house. No rich rugs or heavy curtains to ward off the cold in winter. Noble families know where to keep the luxuries, and, more importantly, where not to waste them. The idea that you might benefit from stitching up that cracked window, or that you'd need more than one scratchy blanket, is ridiculous to anyone managing this estate. After all, you're not supposed to be comfortable. Comfort makes people soft, and soft doesn't wake up before the birds to fetch water. Which, incidentally, is exactly what's about to happen. Without a clock, you've trained yourself to read time by feel. The shift in air, the faint glow starting to seep through those frost-lined gaps in the window. You know it's time. With a long sigh that you try to stifle into nothingness, you pull your feet out from under the thin blanket and plant them on the floor. The shock of stone jolts you fully awake every time. For just a moment you hesitate, calculating how long you could stay still before someone notices you're not up yet. 2 minutes? 5, if everyone's too busy scrambling? not worth the risk today. Your legs push you upright with more effort than they should, and with a small stretch, you prepare to step into the waking world. Your shoes, or what's left of them, sit by your pallet, facing outward as though inviting you in some mockingly polite fashion. They've seen seasons of work, the leather scuffed and cracked from years of wear and years more of getting soaked through. They don't fit you, not really, because they didn't belong to you originally. They were handed down from another servant who got something slightly better, and so on down the line until it was your turn. You slipped them on robotically, too loose at the toe, too tight at the sides. Not worth complaining about, and truthfully, there's no one to complain to even if you wanted to. The walk from your sleeping corner to the entrance is short, but it feels long when every step echoes on stone and your breath clouds in the frosty air. You pass by more crumpled figures of others waking up. A few don't stir, perhaps trying to steal another precious minute, knowing that if they don't move now, they'll pay for it 10 times over later. There's nothing to say to them, and if there were, you wouldn't have the energy. You carry only yourself now, the weight of a single body that must function, fetch, carry, and serve for hours ahead. It never fails to amaze you, though, how the rest of the house seems to belong to an entirely different world. Beyond the servant corridors, as you creep toward the kitchen to begin your early tasks, the air changes. It's warmer, for one thing, though not because of a servant-friendly design. The kitchen fires, banked low through the night, still radiate a latent heat that spills into its surroundings, its warmth teasing but not inviting you fully. Just ahead is the grand hall, though you know better than to walk there now. Its soaring ceilings and grand tapestries seem like decorations from another planet, glimpsed only by those allowed in daylight hours. And yet, knowing it exists just a stone's throw from where you sleep doesn't do much to comfort you. If anything, it solidifies the wall between you and the family that owns this house. They wake far later, their mornings beginning with comfort, soft beds and down pillows, when you've just pried your joints loose from rest on unforgiving stone. In some ways, the grandeur feels insulting, but mostly, you don't think about it at all. You learn not to. After all, if the riches nearby don't make their way to you in material form, why let them live rent-free in your head either? It's always been curious to you, though, how a house of wealth could still leave cold stone floors at its core. Were you to ask someone why, the answer would likely be a glare or a scoff. Servants don't need warmth. They need resilience. Warmth and comfort are there to soften the lives of their employers, not yours. You aren't supposed to settle into this life, even if it's the only one you've got. It's a world in which simply surviving is the mark of your achievement. The light through the cracked window has brightened, and its pale fingers creep toward the cold floor you were just sleeping on. It's a warning. Daylight is here, or close enough, and so begins the true task of being awake, staying useful. You shuffle to the scullery door, feeling the creaks in your bones as you stretch and brace for the jobs ahead. The bucket waits just outside, because of course it does. Its handle is heavy iron and grooves into your hand when you carry it. But it's not just heavy to touch. It's heavy with the day it represents. It's a living promise that before you can even think about yourself, you have to account for what others will need. The morning begins before the sun dares to show itself. The air, still damp and cutting from the night's chill, clings to your skin as you step outside. The bucket, its iron handle biting against your palm even before you pick it up, waits by the scullery door. It hasn't gotten any lighter since yesterday, though you somehow always hope it will. Fetching water is your first chore, and while it's simple to describe, go to the well, fill the bucket, come back. It's anything but simple in practice. There's no well conveniently located near the house. That would be far too sensible. Instead, there's a path you know by heart, winding across uneven ground and slick with mud from the evening dew, that takes you to the nearest well a few hundred paces away. You set out with the same resignation you wear every morning. Your shoes, damp from yesterday's trek, squelch uncomfortably with each step. The cold presses into your toes, but you keep moving. Stopping doesn't make it any warmer. The handle of the bucket digs into the soft skin just below your fingers, a spot already calloused from repetition. Along the way, the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional creak of a tree branch overhead are your only company. The well comes into view eventually, a squat, weathered thing surrounded by patches of frozen grass. The rope is stiff in your fingers as you unwind it, lowering the bucket into the dark, icy depths. It's only when you haul it back up, gloved fingers straining with the weight, that you remember just how miserable water feels sloshing against your legs when it overflows. No matter how carefully you balance it on the return trip, at least a few icy drops always find their way down the side, chilling through cloth and onto your skin. By the time you're back, your hands feel clumsy and swollen from the cold. The kitchen is barely warmer than outside, but the faint warmth from the banked hearth offers pathetic hope. A proper fire needs to be lit now, one that will roar and fill the house with life by the time the nobles are awake. Of course, this is easier said than done. The wood stacked beside the hearth is damp again. It's damp because it's stored outside, and for someone like you, no one cares enough to move it indoors when the weather turns. Starting a fire with dry wood is straightforward. Lighting one with sodden wood is an exercise in frustration and patience you've come to know intimately. You crouch low, almost folding in on yourself in front of the hearth, and carefully arrange the kindling. The first few sparks from the flint catch, but they're weak, lazy things that gutter out as soon as they touch the wood. You blow gently, coaxing the embers to life while your fingers awkwardly turn the sticks so the damp side faces away from the flame. It takes longer than it should, though not because you don't know what you're doing. You've been doing this every morning for as long as you've been working here, but the laws of physics don't care how experienced you are when faced with wet firewood. A tiny flame finally holds, spitting weakly at the base of the pile, and you breathe a sigh of relief. Losing 10 minutes to a stubborn fire doesn't seem like much if you say it quickly, but 10 minutes can mean a late start to something else, and being behind schedule is a risk you can't afford. The fire is still fragile as you step away, casting flickering, uneven light that barely reaches the corners of the large, shadowy kitchen. For now, it will have to do. The next task waits patiently, as it always does in your endless queue of responsibilities. Dishes, the ones left over from the late meal last night, weren't cleaned properly before everyone shuffled off to bed. Not your fault, of course. It wasn't your shift. But when has that ever mattered? You grimace as you plunge your hands into the lukewarm water, recently heated over the same half-started fire. Scrubbing dishes isn't creative or complicated. It's mindless, repetitive, and, save for the faint soap scum clinging to your knuckles, thankless. The higher-ranking staff might be deciding breakfast menus or arranging flowers, but you've developed an intimate relationship with grease stains on plates and heel-worn floors. The dishes are just the warm-up, really. Most mornings, you're juggling 10 different tasks by the time the house begins to stir above. Sweeping the kitchen floor, polishing the edges of copper pots, clearing out ashes from the embers. Not one of these is optional, and none can be done halfway. It isn't enough to sweep the floors. The corners must be free of dust, and the rush matting must be properly brushed. It isn't enough to polish the pots. Their surfaces should shine enough to reflect light. Satisfactory in this house isn't good enough, and the reason for that hovers constantly in the back of your mind. Mistakes are noticed. They're always noticed. You've learned this not through friendly advice from superiors, but through the sharp edge of a reprimand or the heated flush of humiliation. The last time someone spilled water on the kitchen floor, the resulting lecture could be heard clear down the servant corridors. No one remembers who caused the spill, but everyone still steps extra carefully with buckets. Your hands are raw and a little shaky by the time the first faint sounds of the house waking filter down to the kitchen. A door opening somewhere upstairs. A creak in the floorboards. These are your warnings. It won't take long before someone comes down to check how far along you've gotten. Lady so-and-so will want hot water ready for her morning wash. His lordship will expect the fire in his sitting room to be smoked and roaring before he enters. There's no reward for being ahead of schedule, but 100 small punishments for falling behind. It's not just that there's so much to do in these early morning hours. The work you do must also pass scrutiny. A thumbprint on the edge of a polished silver tray could send the housekeeper into a quiet tirade about standards. And that's just the good punishment, the kind that comes with a lecture rather than consequences. Sometimes you catch their stares when they think you're not looking. Those older, higher-ranking servants. Their eyes rake over the corners of the kitchen, the state of your apron, the speed of your hands as they scrub or sweep. Each glance feels heavier than the bucket of water you hauled earlier. Heavier even than the weight of your own exhaustion. You press on anyway. After all, the morning scramble is less about doing things right and more about doing them completely unnoticed. The perfect outcome isn't praise, it's silence. No one's head turns when you pass through a room. No one's voice calls out your name with irritated sharpness. In a way, that's its own kind of relief. As the sound of footsteps above grows louder, closer, you grab the bucket again. This time, the kitchen fire has caught properly, its warmth licking at the edges of the room, marking the start of another frenzied day. The rush of these early hours never lets up. The tasks simply shift to align with the demands of those now waking, yawning, and stretching in the rooms above. The nobles, as always, will expect the impossible. A house that functions like magic, with no hint of the people making it happen. And you move into the next task just as the stair creaks under the first footstep, signaling that someone is on their way. There's no thought of rest as you wipe your damp hands on the side of your apron and straighten. Breakfast needs preparing. Meanwhile, you're still scrambling, still doing anything to stay invisible. The smell hits you long before you see anything. Warm, buttery bread, just pulled from the oven. Thick slices of smoked bacon glistening with grease. Honey dripping lazily off the edge of a clay pot, its golden lines pooling onto a polished wooden board. It's the aroma of decadence, of comfort, and none of it is meant for you. These smells are as close as you'll get to tasting breakfast, and you can't decide whether they're a blessing or a particularly cruel form of mockery. After all, hunger is easier to endure when food doesn't wave itself in your face. The kitchen is alive now, noisy and chaotic, but not for your sake. The finest cuts are being carefully sliced and plated, the bread arranged in neat baskets lined with linen cloth, as though presentation matters as much as taste. Fresh eggs are whisked, pots simmer with thick porridge, and golden brown pastries are pulled from the hearth oven, their tops glossed with butter and just the faintest sugar crunch. Everywhere you turn, food is being fussed over, examined, perfected, and not a scrap of it is for you or those like you. No, this is all for the dining hall upstairs, where the masters of the house will linger over their meal, talking, laughing, perhaps commenting on how delightful the fare is today and how fortunate they are to possess such talented staff. But your own meal, if it can even be called that, is still dependent on timing and luck, if you're lucky to arrange either. Breakfast for servants always comes last, an afterthought tucked into the shadow of their morning chores. You grab hold of a crust, the last surviving piece of yesterday's bread, its edges hardened to the texture of bark, and nibble at it without ceremony. Eating isn't really something to enjoy so much as it's a quick pit stop before someone demands your attention. The taste is dull, stale. What once may have been fresh and springy is now dry, its edges powdery in the corners of your mouth. Hunger keeps you from minding too much. Stale or not, food like this is something you've come to appreciate in its scarcity. Occasionally, though, you let your eyes wander toward what's set aside for the household upstairs. A thick chunk of cheese, creamy and soft, sits temptingly close to the edge of the counter, almost close enough to touch when no one's looking. Beside it are honey-dipped apples, already sliced into wedges, the amber glaze sticking faintly to the blade of the knife resting beside them. Even the vegetables, roasted until tender and dusted with herbs, seem far removed from anything you're allowed to eat. It isn't just food. It's a display of the causal abundance you live and breathe, but never taste. You have no expectation of sharing in it. You know your position too well for that. But on mornings like today, when the emptiness in your stomach claws at you more viciously than usual, the contrast feels unbearable. Historical accounts always describe how tables groaned under the weight of food in royal or noble homes. Roasted pheasants, spice pies, sweet preserves. These were the meals guests remembered, the feasts that made households fabled. What they forget to write down, of course, is how the servants fared. Most days you make do with whatever's left after the main meal's been served, which often isn't much to begin with. If the nobility decided that bowl of stew was worth finishing, there goes your dinner, that second loaf of bread, dismissed by the household as too well done, but becoming your best meal of the week. Cheese rinds, vegetable ends, the crusty dregs of porridge. This is what you pick through when no one's paying attention. Still, mornings like this, those rare mornings where hunger comes before exhaustion overwhelms you, make the indignity more pronounced. The sharp pang in your stomach adds a new layer to the helplessness you feel while walking past steaming trays of food that others will leave half-eaten. A small, strange part of you wonders if they notice the contrast. Do the masters of the house ever look at you carrying their trays and think about the effort it took to prepare their meal, or what's left for the hands that served them? But wishes like these are a waste of thought, something you've learned to cast aside like discarded scraps. Practicality is a better companion than dreaming most days, particularly when dreamers hit hard stone floors first. Even when you do manage to snatch a moment to eat, it's rarely a moment you own entirely. There's always the creeping sense of interruption waiting around every corner. The feeling that the second you find a quiet space to bite into your unremarkable meal, someone will call out for you. A housekeeper asking why the hearth hasn't been scrubbed yet. A senior servant needing flour fetched for the next round of bread making. A page shouting down from upstairs because his lordship wants to know why his tea arrives slightly less scalding than he prefers. Even the act of eating becomes a guilty indulgence, one that's less about savoring food and more about sneaking in calories like a thief. And even in those rare stolen moments, there's no escape from the hierarchy of food and its rules. While nobles might have entire roast joints of meat carved at the table, servants were typically offered boiled scraps of whatever cuts were least desirable. These, combined with thick slices of yesterday's bread or gruel made from coarsely ground oats, were the working staples of a servant's diet. There were no feasts for the ones who hauled water or cleared out the ashes. Life was measured loaf by loaf, bowl by bowl, scraped from the kitchens after noble appetites had already been sated. It wasn't simply bad luck, it was deliberate. A hungry servant was a distracted servant, too preoccupied with their next meal to dwell on the lack of fairness in their world. So you make do. You take another bite from the crust in your hand, swallowing quickly to silence the growl in your stomach, and prep yourself to move before someone catches you lingering too long. The smell of breakfast still wafts thick and taunting around the room, just faint enough to make you ache for more. Everything you're working to clean, prepare, or carry is part of a meal you'll never enjoy or even taste. And yet, this food is your responsibility, your burden, a part of your job that somehow finds ways to insult you at every turn. By mid-morning, you'll have burned through the energy that this sad little meal has given you, leaving your legs leaden and your head light as you continue with your duties. But it doesn't matter whether your workday adds up comfortably with the nourishment you've received. It doesn't matter that you'll wake up tomorrow and suffer the same interior complaint, the muted but persistent wish for just a little more, just enough to not feel gnawed at by hunger between tasks. The fragile line between hunger and energy isn't anyone's concern but yours, and you've learned to manage it in silence, as always. So as the dining hall above you fills with laughter, the gentle clinks of silverware against porcelain plates, and the low murmur of satisfied conversation, your table remains empty. The kitchen hums with activity, shuffling feet and commands barked loudly enough to send anyone moving faster. There's no break, no chance to sit by a warm fire and let your sore shoulders rest. Another task beckons. More boiling water to deliver to the lady's chamber, more silver to polish, more floors to check for stray dirt the masters might see. You tuck what's left of the crust into your pocket without thinking. Later, when no one's watching, maybe you'll get a chance to finish eating it without rushing. Maybe. For now, the act of survival comes second to the reality of servitude. Staying fed never feels like your own accomplishment, but merely something you're allowed to do, faintly, on the margins. After all, that's the point. Desperation keeps you grateful for crumbs. You're lucky enough to have even that. Or so they'd remind you. Hunger is never just about hunger. It's about staying small, too hopeful for scraps to ask for more. You know this much without anyone having to say it. Full bellies make for bold servants, and no house has time for that. The rugs are already spotless. You know this because you've polished these same woven patterns at least a dozen times in the past week. But here you are again, scrubbing until your knuckles ache. Whatever dirt might have once lingered was removed days ago, and any hint of dust hasn't dared to settle since then. But sparkling clean isn't the point here. Clean is never enough. It has to be cleaner than what anyone imagined it could be. If someone looks at it and doesn't immediately feel self-conscious about their own reflection, then clearly the job isn't done. The same could be said for just about everything else in this house. The silverware, gleaming faintly in the sunlight, sits neatly in its display cabinet. It only comes out for important dinners, but even so, it must be polished regularly. You've been told the silver's shine is a reflection of the family's standing, a fact that implies the slightest tarnish, somehow speaks volumes about their reputation. And so, you polish, even though no one will notice, even though it hasn't been touched since the last time you did this. The movements are mechanical now, your hands working methodically, as your mind drifts somewhere else. You wonder if anyone would ever stop to admire the shine, or if they expect it the same way they expect the sun to rise. Next on your list is dusting, though calling it that feels misleading. There isn't any dust. Not really. At least none you can see. And if you're honest, you've looked hard. Yet, the feather duster in your hand makes its rounds through rooms that remain unused for weeks, sometimes months. They're showrooms more than living spaces, decorated as if the family regularly entertains a king or queen, instead of the one or two distant relatives who occasionally visit. Still, the tabletops must be wiped down, the vases adjusted just slightly, and the chair legs dusted as though the particles are hiding in tiny ambushes only you can stop. The linens come next. They've already been washed, folded, and pressed with such precision that you could measure the angle on each crease and likely find perfection. But folded isn't good enough. The lady of the house insists that each sheet be aired out again this morning, just in case. Just in case of what? No one's sure. She doesn't like the idea of anything staying stale, even though they were folded just yesterday. So you carry an armful of them to the line outside, shaking the sheets softly and pinning them in row after row, their edges flapping faintly in the breeze. These repetitive chores could almost be calming, if it weren't for the nagging feeling that none of it matters. Washing the clean and dusting the dustless isn't about the result. It's about the process. Obedience. That's all it is. Through these tasks, the household reminds you of your place, your purpose. To scrub, to tidy, to repeat the same task again and again, day after day, month after month. Because those in charge have decided that enough is a foreign word. You're not just wiping down wood or polishing dishes. You're demonstrating loyalty, silently proving that you understand the rules. Sometimes it feels like the house itself is mocking you, the way polished brass gleams almost smugly after a futile hour of buffing. The hearth grate, rarely used, sits in the drawing room as another glinting monument to your invisible labor. No matter how well it's cleaned, it will never be good enough. Your reward for doing it well is to do it again tomorrow, and again after that. The repetitiveness hums loudly in the back of your mind most days, like a faint ache you never quite get rid of. Historically, noble households were obsessed with order and cleanliness, though not in the practical sense we might understand today. Domestics weren't just keeping spaces livable. They were creating displays of control and prosperity. A pristinely kept rug didn't just mean it was free of dirt. It symbolized wealth, discipline, and authority. That symbolic value meant every object in the home was maintained, as though it carried monumental significance, even if no one was using it. Rugs, linens, silverware. None could be seen as neglected for fear that the household might be judged harshly, whether by a visitor's eye or, more realistically, the standards set by the nobles themselves. Your position doesn't allow you room to question the logic of scrubbing a hall no one walks through. Instead, you focus on simple goals like avoiding mistakes. And yet, the tighter you work to meet these goals, the higher the expectations become. It's never just one rug, one room, one polish. If you finish early, well, clearly, you should have been using that time to do more. The cycle continues endlessly, a subtle punishment for competence. Proving you're too good at one task inevitably means being entrusted with another. There's an irony in it. The house is enormous. a sprawling monstrosity of stone and wood, with enough rooms to house twice its current occupants. And yet, every inch of it demands care. Each stairwell, each banister, each decorative panel carved into the mahogany furniture, all of it tied to some unspoken rule that it must gleam, sparkle, shine. Why? The house doesn't notice. The rugs don't thank you for your effort. Even the nobility, in their fine silks and brocade dining chairs, walk across your hard work without a second thought, often dragging muddy boots or dripping candle wax in their wake. The weight of the tasks doesn't ease your exhaustion. Instead, it stacks higher, spilling out into every moment of your day. As soon as you finish dragging a mop across the scullery floor, someone might notice a streak of soot smeared by a boot and send you to polish the hearth. No sooner do you finish wiping soot than there will be brass railings smudged with fingerprints. The work doesn't pause. It bends and shifts, stretching into every possible corner of your existence. And yet, as absurd as it feels, there's no margin for letting these tasks slip, allowing a layer of dust to build, missing a spot on a rug, or failing to notice a tarnished spoon, is, to those above your station, unthinkable. The consequences escalate with surprising speed, not because the dirt itself is such an insult, but because failing to clean it suggests something worse. Defiance. A refusal to do your duty. It's never explicit, but that's the constant undercurrent, the unsaid truth behind these chore lists. You're not just cleaning. You're proving you belong on your knees, rag in hand. Every task completed is proof of submission. You find yourself thinking back to moments in your day when no one was looking. A quick glance at the morning dew on the window glass, the soft hiss of trees moving in the wind as you aired out the linens. Quiet seconds stolen amidst the monotony. You hold on to these moments tightly. They seem to be the only things you have. But the house always calls you back. The next task is always waiting just at the edge of your daydreams. By the time the rugs are firmly in place again, their surfaces flawless and smooth, you're already anticipating what will come next. The master of the house has a habit of noticing specks in cabinetry, of running his fingers along ledges during idle conversation. You can still remember the time someone before you, one of the newer girls, forgot to dust a ledge in the library. The result wasn't loud, not in the dramatic sense. Just a quiet, furious scolding by the housekeeper, the kind that carves the lesson deep enough that you, too, never forget it. Mistakes here ripple outward, affecting everyone. Cleanliness is collective, or so they tell you. When one fails, all fail. As the early afternoon light stretches through the hallways, you take a step back and notice the faint metallic hint of soap lingering on your palms from polishing. It won't wash out entirely before the day is over, but that's fine. Soap or no, you'll have rubbed the life back into that same silver by this time tomorrow. Clean today doesn't mean clean forever. It doesn't even mean clean for long. Just clean enough for a moment. Noticed by no one, remembered by even fewer. You sigh, not loudly or dramatically. Small grumbles are dangerous things in a house where silence is expected. It's just enough to expel the stale breath you've been holding as you step into the kitchen again. Your hands reach instinctively for the wash basin, brushing over water no longer warm from the fire. But that's all right. Your work isn't a performance for praise or even acknowledgement. It's a placeholder, a way to keep the wheels of this place turning. Nothing matters but the doing, even when the doing feels pointless. And maybe that's the part that tired you most of all. You're running late. Not terribly late. Not forgot to wake up entirely late. But late enough that you'll be cutting it close. And now, as you carry the tray with steaming dishes carefully balanced on its surface, you feel the acid pit of regret gnawing at your insides. You should have wiped the cups one more time before setting them down this morning. Or maybe you should have draped the napkins tighter, neater. No hint of a wrinkle left. But you didn't. You didn't because there's only so much time in the day. And unfortunately, time doesn't stop for people like you. Moving quickly is a cruel necessity, though working quickly isn't the same thing as working flawlessly. And in this house, flawless is the price of survival. In fact, nothing is ever small when it's labeled a mistake here. A spilled drink isn't an accident, it's an offense. A fork out of place isn't just absent-mindedness, it's a sign of negligence. The stakes are sharp despite being unnecessary, and the message is clear. Even the smallest failure is a reflection of who you are and how little the household values you. Dropping a tray, smudging the silver after you've just polished it, leaving the faintest streak across a window pane. It doesn't matter how minor the error is. It matters that the error exists. And if it's noticed, rest assured, the consequences will far outweigh the crime. Take this morning, for example. A thin ceramic mug warms your hand through the base of the tray you're carrying. It's teetering a bit every time you move, and you know the weight of it is precarious, unbalanced. Your free hand darts over, steadying it before the inevitable shift sends hot tea spilling across the plate below. By sheer luck, or perhaps what little muscle memory you've managed to build through stress and desperation, you save it just in time. Still, your heartbeat gallops in your chest as though you weren't quick enough. Because there's a new reality to grapple with now. It's not always about what you did or didn't do. It's about whether they think you've misstepped. The very suspicion is sometimes enough. Not every mistake results in the wrath of a superior, though many do. Punishment here is a creative art form. No two reprimands feel the same, though their weight sits identically in your chest for hours afterward. Maybe you'll get away with just a stinging word or two. A sharp rebuke delivered in the echoing hallway, loud enough that everyone passing by hears your failure announced. These moments are worse than the initial mistake sometimes. They turn co-workers into witnesses, even if they pity you, and they never actually do. It's not as though they can help you. For them, noticing means taking mental note. Don't repeat what she did. Avoid the same target on your own back. But that's the lighter side of punishment. The worst days leave you scrambling for hours to undo whatever mistake you've already made. You might, for example, be asked to clean the kitchens all over again. If you missed a smudge on the uppermost shelf of a cabinet, congratulations. The whole scullery will now require scrubbing, polishing, and restoring, as though it hasn't already been scrubbed twice. Or if your pace wasn't fast enough delivering one task, you'll find a string of new demands laid out intentionally, stacking impossibilities that test how well you follow under pressure. These tasks aren't about fixing mistakes. That's the secret you've come to learn over time. They're about making sure you know that your error didn't go unnoticed. Orders handed down through clenched teeth. Ensure your thoughts linger on what you've done wrong long after the task itself is finished. For many servants, however, physical punishments were another layer of reality. Housekeepers sometimes ruled their underlings as harshly as the nobility ruled them, doling out slaps across the wrist or the occasional knotted switch, meant to leave raised welts as reminders. And while no one would admit such tactics openly, especially not the household's masters, a bruised arm or pinched ear was explained away as discipline, not cruelty. After all, if you believed their reasoning, such corrections helped maintain order, as though pain focused the mind, made the hands quicker, steadier, more apt. You quickly realize this constant fear of failure is by design. It keeps you on edge, too preoccupied with your own survival to think deeper about the dynamics in the house. Thinking beyond your role, considering what punishments are meant to enforce, is a luxury you can't afford. Instead, you're reduced to pure reaction. Avoid reprimand, avoid punishment, avoid being seen, until you've made sure every edge of your workday shines brighter than the sun filtering through the dusty windows. The strangest part, though, over time, this fear mutates into something else. It becomes a low pulse beneath the surface of your day, steady and insistent, but almost invisible when you've grown numb to it. Its effect becomes less obvious, but all-encompassing. You don't take pride in your work anymore because perfection is expected and fleeting. The hours you pour into scrubbing, folding, or shining don't matter. What matters is that you erase any trace of imperfection. And when nothing is ever good enough, no task feels worthy of effort beyond basic necessity. You complete things out of habit, not hope, because no one ever says, "You've done well." The best response you can expect is silence. Emotionally, it empties you out in ways you don't even realize until they've gone far too deep. You start to confuse your value with the work itself. If a shelf goes undusted or a fire burns unevenly, it feels less like you failed at the task and more like you, as a person, are wrong. When mistakes are amplified and paraded the way they are here, they plant roots in your head, lingering far longer than the reprimands themselves. Between the weight of expectations and the constant paranoia of missteps, even your small joys, if they can be called that, begin to stiffen, wilt. You used to love the soft glow of morning sunlight creeping into the kitchen, but now that golden light feels less like a peaceful moment and more like a taunt, a reminder of how visible everything is. Earlier in your life here, you might have stopped to notice how the swirls of dust glitter in that slanted light, catching their quiet drift. Now, all you think is, how did I miss dust? There. Ultimately, this environment leaves no space for individuality. There's no sense of self to anchor you when failure is conflated with worth. You stop decorating your bunk with scraps of cloth you once enjoyed, perhaps a stitch of green pulled from an old apron, stitched clumsily like someone who still wants beauty in small corners of their life. You stop smiling at the smallest coincidences, like hearing the sparrows land in their usual nest by the window ledge, thinking they almost sound happy. A household like this doesn't just punish mistakes, it saps everything soft out of you. And when only hardness remains, you're easier to control. The expectation itself wasn't always so harsh. A servant could, theoretically, exist without a misstep every day. But that's a theory only. The reality is that the number of chores, the rushed moments combined with ludicrously high stakes, meant problems arose even from doing tasks in precisely the right way. If the weight of stress isn't enough, sometimes it spills into what little group unity you hope to find below stairs, because mistakes affect everyone. A missed detail, like forgetting to stock spare wood for the fire, could lead to group admissions of blame after a tense scolding from the butler or head servant. Even private errors would find public consequences. And inevitably, punishment wasn't about correcting work. It was about placing a pin in the larger map, reiterating over and over how invisible lines existed between perpetrator and master. Knowing enough to trace those borders silently, but never cross them, that was your job. Or, as this morning's task reminds you, would you dare mess up again even this late on? You already know the answer, breath unsteady, waiting for stern reprimand, the cough starts in the back of your throat. Barely more than a tickle at first. Easy enough to swallow down when no one's looking. But then it happens again, this time sharper, rattling behind your ribs and echoing in your chest loud enough that you grit your teeth, hoping the sound doesn't carry. Too late. A senior servant flicks their eyes toward you, their expression equal parts disapproval and impatience, as though you've offended them by daring to let your body get sick in the first place. You tighten your scarf, clear your throat as quietly as you can, and force yourself back to work. To be ill as a servant isn't an inconvenience for you. It's a burden for everyone else. For the housekeepers, it means worrying that one of their precious schedules may have to be adjusted. For the butler, it means asking whether someone else can pick up your slack without grumbling loudly enough for the family to hear. And for the masters of the estate, it's another reminder of how fragile the working class is. Fragile while pushing through damp kitchens and freezing hallways. Fragile while hefting firewood or carrying jugs of bathwater up the stairs. Your health, or lack of it, isn't a concern because it impacts you. No, it's only noticed when it disturbs the uninterrupted rhythm of the household. You try not to dwell on the idea of rest. What rest could even mean here, where there is no soft bed, no healer waiting in the wings to tuck you into fresh sheets? The concept of stopping, of lying down somewhere and simply coughing without fear, feels foreign, almost absurd. So you push through. Everyone does. Illness isn't treated like a season to endure, but an unfortunate fact of life. One you're expected to ignore, so long as your legs still hold and your hands still function. A fever makes you slower, but no less obligated. The heat behind your eyes burns quietly as you shuffle through the day, careful not to knock over anything fragile with hands that feel heavier than usual. The weight of the bucket you carry to the kitchens leaves your arms aching almost immediately, the handle cutting deeper into your skin than it did yesterday. Still, you keep moving. Small falters won't earn you exemption from chores. They'll just earn you louder complaints from those who rely on you to hold things together, even while they avoid getting too close, lest your sickness rub off on them. It isn't uncommon for servants like you to work themselves into deeper illness. There are no official allowances for bedridden days. Lying down means someone else is stuck dragging the laundry instead of you. Skipping your duties means the head housekeeper has to answer for why the pantry wasn't swept. And if your coughing is too noticeable, then you're sent outside to complete tasks in the cold instead, on the logic that at least you won't spread your weakness indoors, where more valuable lives reside. Once or twice you've seen what happens when sickness overtakes someone fully, swallowing their strength whole until they have nothing left. These are the moments everyone fears, the ones that strip away any illusion that effort or discipline can beat back illness through sheer force of will. You recall a cough that once began quietly in the chest of another maid years ago, the girl barely having enough energy to explain herself before she fainted halfway across the hallway. When foreign doctors explained illnesses like that, tuberculosis they argued, or consumption, the knowledge rarely reached servants. Instead, it became chalked up to another case of overwork, as though the combination of freezing mornings and constant strain alone could exhaust life out of a body. The physical toll doesn't go unnoticed. Hands that once earned calluses earning their keep are now trembling shadows of strength, holding onto rail banners for balance before collapsing onto stone or wood. Some servants hide their pain longer than others, gritting through blurry vision with unspoken resolve. Their quiet misery speaks volumes to those standing near those suffering, yet expected far more loudly to recover schedules themselves against new demands. Pain isn't emotional anymore. Instead, it's compartmental, breaking rigid employees systematically down physically before mentally broken thinking they'd recovered. Serving nobler causes await others hot to drop precisely where weakened reserves once fold. Quietly thresholds suffer unsent signals holding resolve breaking muscles, elasticity boundaries attempting rest, states unattainable, realistically subjugating vulnerable majority generous gratitude forgotten. Even in the rare quiet moments when the day's endless cycle of carrying, scrubbing and shuffling slows, you never feel fully alone. Privacy isn't just scarce, it's non-existent. The back-breaking work may ebb and flow, but the feeling of being watched is constant. Not in the dramatic, sinister way you'd imagine from stories or plays. It's quieter, humming low in the background. A steady reminder that every step, every breath, and every half-second you steal for yourself is part of someone else's tally. You know this because you felt it from the moment you arrived. The sharp eyes of the housekeeper scanning the breadth of the hallway, always quick to catch the smallest sag in your posture, or the faintest stray wrinkle in your apron. She never yells, at least not at full volume. Her tone is clipped, deliberate, each word laced just enough to sting. "Is that how we dust now?" she might ask, her voice lilting with mock curiosity. Or worse, "I'd hate for the master to call attention to this." The implication hangs heavy in the air. If she noticed, others may too, and you'll be the one answering for it. But it doesn't stop with supervisors. There's always someone nearby who might be watching, even in your most unguarded moments. The other servants, for one. Your fellow workers, huddled together as you all shuffle back to the servants' quarters, could just as easily be allies as informants. It's not their fault, really. When every person in the house is working to avoid blame, loyalty takes a backseat to survival. Someone might mention, politely of course, what they saw you do or not do earlier that day. A missed step, a plate that wasn't stacked properly, an overheard sigh of frustration in the pantry. Gossip travels fast, faster than you'd think, and somehow every minor grievance spirals upward until it lands at the feet of someone important. Half-truths are enough. Perception is reality here. At night, you'd expect relief, at least in the simplest sense. Surely rest should offer you some sense of secrecy or solace. But instead, your sleeping quarters remind you just how little room you're allowed to claim for yourself. 3 to a room, sometimes more depending on how many hands the household keeps. The narrow spaces between thin pallets or creaking cots are just wide enough to let cold air snake through, but too close for comfort. Privacy is reduced to adjusting your blanket under the cover of near darkness without anyone noticing. Dressing in the morning becomes a skill honed to avoid comment. Facing the wall, crouching low, tucking your shirt in before someone casts a glance your way. If there is privacy here, it exists only in stolen fragments of instinct. A sneeze swallowed mid-breath to avoid drawing attention. A few extra seconds cleaning your apron fold before shifting into the kitchen. A slight glance downward when the head cook looks irritated enough to find someone to blame. These fragments aren't restful. They're exhausting in their own way, but they're the closest you'll get to having a moment where you aren't entirely exposed. Then there's the matter of the household itself. You're never quite sure who might appear or call for you at any hour. Servants' quarters, smaller and tucked away though they are no real barrier. The household's masters could summon you just as easily if they needed a fire poked or a chore completed before morning's bustle begins. You wouldn't hear them coming, until the door creaks faintly on its hinges or their voice cuts through the faint rustling of your sleeping companions. Perhaps they'll knock, though they don't really need to. The quarters belong to their house after all. You just sleep in it. These patterns reinforce something far bigger than daily exhaustion, something you recognize but could never articulate aloud in a house like this. The lack of privacy, the constant scrutiny, the shared whispers about who forgot an order or angered the cook. It all exists to remind you of your place. Every inch of your existence here is evidence of a hierarchy you cannot escape. Even your body feels like it's being borrowed property, lent precariously to an institution that would discard you as easily as a spent broom. Constant surveillance keeps you obedient, keeps you malleable. There's no chance to question or dream when you're too busy monitoring yourself. Oddly, it's the moments when you think you're alone that feel the most suffocating. Sitting on the edge of your bed, trying to rub some life back into your legs after a long day. Your mind doesn't wander to quiet reflections or stolen bits of peace. No, you're replaying every step, every comment made by others, every sideways glance you caught while scrubbing a floor or delivering a tray. Did you take too long fetching the water today? Did the head housekeeper notice that smudge on the silver after you'd polished it? Did the master's youngest son see you pause to adjust your shoes in the hallway? Isolation here is never restful. It's a magnifying glass that turns inward, a reminder that even your moments of stillness are just opportunities to catch mistakes you hope others didn't see. Historically, this lack of privacy wasn't just a byproduct of cramped living conditions or overbearing supervision. It was intentional. Households like this were built on structure and control, and privacy didn't fit into that structure. If you couldn't relax, you couldn't grow complacent. If you couldn't be alone, you couldn't dissent or conspire or even question the life you were living. Constant proximity to your peers, to your superiors, and to the family you served blurred the edges of your individuality. You weren't a person as much as you were an extension of the house's will, a moving part in an intricate machine designed to run perfectly, invisibly, and without complaint. And yet, you can't pretend the arrangement doesn't wear on you. There's a toll that comes with always being vigilant, with knowing your movements are observed and your words overheard. Your voice feels smaller as the weeks pass, your shoulders drawn in, even when you're not carrying anything heavy. The instinct to shrink, to exist as little as possible, becomes second nature, and it's not until much later, when you're lying in the dark and the house finally quiets, that the ache between your shoulders reminds you how heavy silence is here. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that feels like 1,000 eyes scolding you long after they've stopped looking. Even the rare reprieves, those brief minutes when you step outside to hang linens or walk between wings of the house, are tainted by the same weight. Someone could still glance from a window overhead or cross the corridor at just the right time to catch you out of place. You're never truly unwatched, never truly free, even in the unlikeliest of moments. And that lack of freedom, more than the dusting or the hauling or the endless scrubbing, is what you long for most. That, perhaps, is what separates the life you live from the life of those who wander outside these walls. Out there, even the poorest beggar has something you don't. The ability to sit under the stars, face turned upward, completely unseen. You envy them most on nights like now, while lying in a room full of quiet breathing, each sound a reminder that you are nowhere near alone. To an outsider standing at the gates, your life might seem enviable. You're inside the warmth, well, relative warmth, of a grand estate. You're surrounded by fine furnishings, polished silver, and all the trappings of wealth that, from a distance, might make someone believe you're luckier than most. Compared to the beggars huddling under thin blankets by the roadside, you sleep with a roof over your head. Compared to the street vendors struggling to scrape together a meal, you see bountiful feasts pass before your eyes every day. It's easy to imagine someone walking past these grand walls and wishing to trade places with the shadowy figures bustling behind them. But easy rarely means accurate. From the inside, the luxury is nothing but a facade, as distant from your life as the stars beyond the nighttime sky. Yes, the silver is polished by your hands. The meals are sumptuous, seen only from the servant's entrance as you carry trays to the dining hall. The clothes are rich, handled daily, smooth for creases, and arranged in wardrobes more spacious than the closet-sized room where you sleep. Yet none of this is yours. The wealth you work so hard to maintain isn't meant to touch you in any meaningful way. You're surrounded by it, steeped in the illusion, but it's more likely to crush you than elevate you. Every day, as you scrub the worn soles of boots or mend a tear in the hem of a silk gown, you're reminded of the divide that keeps you tethered to this house. The same divide that forces you to place a shining silver tray laden with roasted meat onto a pristine table, only to step back silently into the shadows while others take their ease. You can't help but notice their hands, the delicate way they hold their knives, the casual way they lean in their chairs as if the world itself bends to accommodate their comfort. And yet, here you are, hands rough, scarred from work, fingers aching from the constant grip of toil. Each meal you serve feels like an unspoken lesson, a steady reminder to stay in your place. It's not that you've never tried to imagine what it would be like to belong at that table, to sit in one of the high-backed chairs, to carve into a thick piece of venison, laid on a plate so fine you'd be scolded just for handling it incorrectly. There's a strange magnetism to the world. You keep running circles around but never touch. It pulls you in with whispers of grandeur, only to shove you back with the firm, unyielding truth that servants exist to serve, not to share. Deep down, you know this pull is deliberate. This arrangement isn't just about proximity to power. It's about showing you what power looks like, what it tastes like, and then ensuring you know you'll never have it. The system thrives on illusion. Noble households were well aware that life as a servant often appeared better than life on the streets, and they used this perception as a tool. The idea that a servant was lucky enough to work indoors, to eat scraps instead of starving, to live under the roof of a lord or lady, was carefully cultivated. It was a justification for the endless hours, the harsh conditions, the complete erasure of individuality. After all, if people envied you from the outside, how bad could it really be? And maybe there were moments where you started to believe it yourself, when the frost collected on the edges of the windows in the winter mornings, and you watched a group of vagabonds huddled around a pitiful little fire near the edge of the road. It was hard not to recognize a certain sense of bitter privilege. You weren't out there in the biting wind with nothing but a cloak full of holes. You had walls to keep the worst of the weather out, however cold they might be. You had the luxury of work, back-breaking, unending work, but at least it kept you moving, alive. And sometimes, when guilt crept in, you even told yourself this misery was better than the alternative, better than starving or begging, better than weaving through dark alleyways trying to avoid thieves or worse. But those self-soothing thoughts always evaporated under the crushing weight of reality. Proximity to wealth means nothing when it's wealth you can never touch. The fine clothes you handle every day wouldn't fit you even if you dared try them on, which of course you wouldn't. It's an unwritten rule that you're invisible unless you make a mistake, and something tells you wearing the master's coat or the lady's brocade gown would go beyond mistake territory and straight into disaster. You patch holes in shawls, more valuable than anything you'll own in your lifetime. You roll up carpets so thick and soft that for a moment it's tempting to just press your face into them, feel their warmth, but you wouldn't dare. The thought alone is ridiculous. Instead, you carry them to be beaten or cleaned, knowing they cost more than your labor could possibly repay if you damage them. The meals are worse. It's one thing to sew or polish something that isn't yours, but food, well, food is harder to ignore. The roasted pheasants, glazed over with thick, glistening juices, the wheels of cheese big enough to feed a village, the bowls of soup steaming with herbs and spices only nobles could afford. They all pass under your hands, tantalizingly close but out of reach. You wouldn't dream of taking even a scrap from the serving dishes. Not only would it be obvious, because let's be honest, they'd notice, but the fear of punishment outweighs the brief satisfaction it might bring. So instead, you swallow around the ache of hunger gnawing at your stomach and focus on the task at hand. This illusion isn't just cruel, it's effective. It traps you in place, ensuring that you cling to what little security the job offers while longing for the very opulence that alienates you. It's a clever kind of control, letting you believe you're better off here, even while every corner of this life makes you smaller. The alternative, they'd remind you if you complained, is starvation, the streets, the uncertainty of whether you'll survive the winter at all. So you stay, because what other choice do you truly have? But deep down, you sometimes wonder if the beggars by the road aren't freer than you are. Sure, they sleep beneath the stars instead of a leaking roof. They endure the bitter night air, the gnaw of hunger every hour of every day. But they have something you don't: freedom. They can curse the Lord passing by in his gilded carriage without worrying about who's listening. They can walk down the road without a leash, difficult, invisible, but a leash nonetheless, tying them to work that never ends. They don't live with the constant twisting knot in their stomachs that tells them they could be replaced with a snap of their employer's fingers. You think about that now and then, mostly when you're alone, usually while folding linens too fine to belong to someone like you. The lace trimming brushes against your fingers as you work, delicate, yet another reminder of someone else's wealth. You picture the beggar instead, their thin hands holding onto scraps of wool for warmth, and you wonder who's the worse off. Do they look at you and think you're rich? Do they see your thin shadow pass behind the windows of the estate and assume your life must be better? The irony is that you're both more alike than you'd care to admit. Both of you survive by scavenging what the world allows you. Both of you look at better circumstances, wealthier, warmer, more comfortable lives, and see the impossible reflected back. But at least the beggar has no illusions. At least they don't live neck deep in grandeur they'll never taste. Luxury is a strange thing when you're close enough to touch it, but never allowed. It doesn't comfort, it mocks. Every polished plate you deliver, every shining chandelier you dust, every embroidered pillow you arrange becomes another needle, quietly stitching the knowledge of what you'll never have into your mind. You're surrounded by reminders of wealth, but it's not yours to keep, not even for a moment. And so you fold the linens and tuck them back into their place, the lace trim brushing softly against its neighbors. The beggar keeps their place outside, far from the polished walls, while you keep yours inside. But the outcome feels much the same. Freedom is a strange thing to measure when you've never really had it. For you, It's an abstract idea, like a half-forgotten dream or a story someone once told you. But whatever it might be, it isn't this. Scrubbing floors under someone else's roof isn't freedom. Watching the masters of the house take their leisure, wrapped in every comfort imaginable, while you sleep on a thin mat in a cold hallway isn't freedom. You've heard it said, probably in a scolding tone, that servitude keeps you from starving. You're told it's better than begging or stealing or freezing to death under a sky that doesn't care if you live or die. But every so often, you wonder if that's really true. It's not an easy thought to admit, not when every bit of your life has been arranged to keep you tethered to this house. You've been told over and over that servants like you have it better than anyone left to fend for themselves out there in the streets. It's the story they like to tell, the one that keeps you grateful when there's nothing to be grateful for. At least you're not sleeping outside under the stars, shivering as the frost creeps over your threadbare cloak. At least they say you have work and shelter and food, even if it's stale bread and the half-gnawed bones left on their plates. But once in a while, when you're up before dawn, hands aching from the cold water you fetched from the well, that story seems thinner than the gruel you eat on bad days. You've seen beggars. You've passed them on rare trips into the town, huddled against stone walls with their backs hunched and their faces hidden. Maybe their faces were gaunt, maybe their hands were filthy, but there was no one standing over them, barking orders about the proper way to arrange plates on a table or how much firewood should be carried upstairs. You wonder if they answer to anyone but the wind. The streets aren't kind. You know that much. A beggar sleeps against the hard ground with the sky open wide above them. But at least the stars are theirs for the looking, free and infinite. No one catches them lingering too long over their supper or scraping the last crust from the edge of the bowl because there's no one to notice. Their hunger is theirs to bear, yes, but their time is theirs too. And that thought, fleeting as it is, sinks into you like a thorn. You've heard of servants who left, who slipped away in the middle of the night, light-footed and desperate, without so much as a backward glance. No one talks about them in any real detail. The household speaks of them in vague, scornful tones, warning of what likely became of those foolish enough to leave. They starved, the housekeeper muttered once, with a dismissive wave of her hand, as though it were a certainty, not a possibility. Or worse. No one ever explains what could be worse, but the threat lingers. Maybe that's the point. Servants who disappear into the streets become cautionary tales rather than neighbors worth remembering. And yet, for every whispered warning, there's an edge of curiosity. Why would they leave? Was the hunger that terrible? Was the lord of the house too cruel? Or, though no one likes to say this part aloud, did they leave not because it was impossible to stay, but because staying wasn't enough? You wonder sometimes what makes someone cross that line, trading miserable certainty for the unknown. What pushes them to a point where frostbitten nights and empty stomachs feel less despairing than this endless cycle of work and submission? In their own way, the streets give something this house never will. Autonomy. Out there, no bells chime to summon you from your bed. There's no watchful eye pressing against your back. No superior servant who takes your exhaustion as a personal slight. You go to sleep when you're ready, if you can find somewhere safe enough, and wake when your body stirs. Even without comfort, those small acts feel enormous. You might not eat every meal, but the ones you do get are yours alone, not a second-hand afterthought born from the scraps of someone else's appetite. There's no one hovering at your shoulder, no invisible leash pulling tighter with every mistake. You belong only to yourself. The historians, or the ones who cared enough to write about servants and the poor, would tell you that noble houses relied on fear to keep their staff obedient. Fear of hunger, fear of punishment, fear of losing the supposed privilege of serving up close to wealth. But they didn't often consider the other side of that contract, what a servant gained by walking away. It wasn't safety, certainly not stability, but it was space. Even the smallest streets bring a kind of vastness you can't find within the walls of a house like this. The risks were 100-fold, but to some, those risks were outweighed by the simple promise of choice. Don't misunderstand. No one leaves to escape hardship. Street life is hardship, stripped bare of even the smallest comforts. Survival is its own full-time job out there, and yet, in all its harshness, there's still a sliver of something human. If someone passes you by in the shadows, they don't call out your faults or assign you some demeaning task. They move on, unbothered. You get to exist without being reduced, day after day, to the accident of your station. Hardship shared among equals is still hardship, but it's an entirely different kind from the quiet erosion that happens here. Of course, leaving isn't romantic. It isn't as simple as imagining warmth in the company of other beggars, or finding dignity in nightly solitude beneath the stars. Sometimes, it's fear that holds you back. You don't know how far you'd get before hunger overtook you altogether. You think of moments you'd rather not dwell on too long. The beggar with the missing teeth, their hands trembling from cold or illness, their eyes hollow beyond anything you've ever seen in the mirror. You think of rules that were drilled into your head long ago. The streets aren't freedom, they're the end. Everything about this life has been designed to convince you there's nothing worse than stepping outside it. Still, late at night, when your body aches from the day's labor and your stomach churns weakly over leftovers too stale, even for the house's cats, the thought sneaks in. What if this isn't the better life? What if cold stone floors and borrowed blankets aren't such a gift after all? Not when the price paid is your very sense of self. There's no one to say so, but sometimes you feel it anyway. That sliver of jealousy, gnawing somewhere deep when you think about the beggar sleeping in a doorway somewhere. No one to answer to but themselves. And you know you aren't the only one to feel this way. No one says it aloud, not directly anyway. But there are quiet murmurs beneath their steps, unspoken envy tangled in the steady rhythm of endless housekeeping. You've seen it in the cook's far-off stare, her hands still scrubbing a spotless pot, while the flames in the hearth sputter, as though mirroring her thoughts. You've caught it in the maid's careful glances out the window, lingering a fraction longer when travelers pass by, even as she pretends not to notice them. You wonder if you'll ever join those travelers. If someday, when the air feels lighter and the house quiets just slightly more than usual, your feet might carry you beyond the gates of this estate. It's not that you don't fear it, you do. But fear doesn't make the longing go away. It sharpens it, even making the dream of freedom feel hungry all on its own. As you lie down tonight, curling tightly under a thin blanket, you think again of the beggars you've seen, the way they sit, unhurried, on stone steps with their heads tucked against their knees. The freedom to just sit, not to perform or perfect or apologize, just to exist, quietly, without the weight of the house pressing down on every breath. You wonder what that would feel like. You wonder if it might feel closer to home than these walls ever have. Imagine it, living so close to wealth that you can see it, touch it, even polish it, but knowing it'll never be yours. Life as a servant wasn't just about worn hands or sleepless nights. It was a slow, deliberate stripping away of identity. Every command, every mile walked for someone else's comfort, reminded you that you belonged to the house, not yourself. And yet, here you are now, lying in your own bed, warm and free in ways that servants of the past could barely imagine. Perhaps history's smallest stories, like theirs, teach us the most about what freedom truly means.